Welcome back to Global Current Lens, where headlines are decoded, strategies are exposed, and the truth about global events comes into focus. Explanation: as the United States enters the second week of a government shutdown, the Senate remains locked in stalemate and no deals, no breakthroughs. Just a grinding standoff that has left federal workers' unpaid government services frozen and markets jittery. The world is watching because when Washington stalls, the ripple effects stretch far beyond American borders. Quick context snapshot: a government shutdown in the United States occurs when Congress fails to pass the necessary spending bills or a continuing resolution to fund federal operations. Without that legal authority, much of the government grinds to a halt. In this shutdown, we are now in week 2. Hundreds of thousands of federal employees remain furloughed or working without pay. Critical agencies, like the Departments of Agriculture, Transportation, Explanation, parts of Homeland Security, are partially shuttered. National parks are closed, visa processing is slowed, and scientific research labs are losing valuable time. Explanation: this is not the first shutdown in American history, but its timing at a moment of global uncertainty, fragile economic conditions, explanation, and political polarization makes it uniquely dangerous. The immediate event, the immediate flashpoint, is in the Senate. For the second week in a row, senators have failed to pass a spending measure that would reopen the government. Multiple proposals have been brought to the floor, some bipartisan, some strictly along party lines, but none have cleared the 60-vote threshold required to advance. At the core of the dispute is not just budget numbers. It is a clash of agendas. One side demands increased funding for border security and new restrictions on immigration policy. The other insists on protecting social programs, climate initiatives, and maintaining current budget caps. Behind closed doors, explanation: party leaders shuttle between press conferences and late-night meetings, but the rhetoric has hardened. Each day emerge accusations of hostage-taking, ultimatums, and declarations that compromise is impossible. Meanwhile, federal employees are becoming the face of the crisis. Paychecks are halted, mortgage payments missed. Food pantries are stepping in to help government workers feed their families. In airports, security lines grow longer as unpaid TSA officers call in sick. Explanation: financial markets so far are holding steady, but volatility is rising, and business leaders warn that if the shutdown stretches deeper into October, it could disrupt supply chains and dent consumer confidence. The shutdown has become more than a budget fight. It is now a symbolic showdown over political power and the capacity of Washington to govern itself. Explanation: historical and political context. To understand the weight of this moment, it helps to place it in the history of American governance. The first modern government shutdown occurred in 1976 when President Gerald Ford vetoed a spending bill. Since then, there have been more than 20 shutdowns of varying length and severity. The longest lasted 35 days from late 2018 into early 2019. When disputes over border wall funding paralyzed Washington. Every shutdown reflects a deeper political battle. Sometimes it is over taxes, sometimes over health care, sometimes over defense spending. What has changed over the decades is the level of polarization. In earlier years, shutdowns were shorter and often resolved through quick compromises. Today, they have become weapons of leverage. Lawmakers use the threat of a shutdown to force concessions on issues far beyond the budget. Politically, shutdowns are risky. Polls usually show that Americans dislike them, blaming Congress as a whole or whichever party is seen as obstructing a deal. Federal workers, often spread across states and districts, form a vocal constituency demanding relief. But in the current climate of hyper-partisanship, leaders sometimes gamble that taking a hard line will energize their base. They believe that appearing uncompromising can win future elections. Even if the immediate costs are high, the political context also stretches beyond Capitol Hill. Presidents, regardless of party inclination, face intense pressure during shutdowns. They're accused of failing to lead. Their approval ratings often take a hit. And international allies quietly question America's reliability when its own government cannot keep its doors open. This is the backdrop of the present shutdown. A nation, not just a dispute over dollars, but a reflection of America's struggle with its own democratic machinery. Global reaction: the United States is not isolated. What happens in Washington reverberates across the world. Allies in Europe and Asia watch nervously. They depend on American leadership in defense, trade, and global finance. A prolonged shutdown raises doubts. If Washington cannot fund its own government, Can it credibly lead international coalitions, negotiate treaties, or sustain foreign aid commitments? The European Union has expressed concern about the shutdown, noting that it complicates joint planning on defense and energy cooperation. NATO officials emphasize that U.S. commitments remain intact, but privately, with some diplomats whisper that American reliability looks shaky. In Asia, trading partners like Japan and South Korea monitor the shutdown's impact on markets. The U.S. explanation: dollar remains the world's reserve currency, and any sign of instability sends shockwaves through global finance. If Treasury bond auctions are delayed or if economic data releases are postponed because agencies are shuttered, investors worldwide feel the uncertainty. Rivals, too, are paying attention. Beijing and Moscow frame the shutdown as evidence of American dysfunction. Explanation: state media in both countries highlight images of closed federal buildings and unpaid workers as symbols of decline. The message is subtle but sharp. Explanation: the self-proclaimed leader of the free world cannot even pay its own employees. Developing nations reliant on U.S. aid and loans are equally anxious. Delays in funding for health programs, disaster relief, or infrastructure projects can ripple into real hardship abroad. The global reaction, in short, is a mixture of worry, opportunism, and calculation. The world depends on American stability, yet it must also adapt when Washington falters. The economic and strategic stakes. The economic stakes of the shutdown are significant and growing with each passing day. Economists estimate that every week of a shutdown trims billions off U.S. GDP. Federal workers who miss paychecks cut back on spending. Small businesses that rely on government contracts see cash flow dry up. Farmers await subsidies that do not arrive. The stock market may weather short shutdowns, but prolonged paralysis can shake investor confidence. If economic data from agencies like the Bureau of Labor Statistics or the Commerce Department is delayed, traders and policymakers operate in the dark. Markets hate uncertainty, and shutdowns feed it in abundance. Credit rating agencies also loom in the background. In past shutdowns, the U.S. has faced warnings of potential downgrades. Such a move would make borrowing more expensive, raising interest rates and widening deficits. Explanation: strategically, the stakes are even higher. A government that cannot fund itself projects weakness abroad. Explanation: military readiness can suffer if training schedules and maintenance are disrupted. Intelligence operations may slow as analysts are furloughed. Diplomats lose flexibility when budgets freeze. Rivals can exploit these vulnerabilities. They know that Washington's bandwidth is consumed by internal gridlock. Crises abroad may go unanswered, sanctions enforcement may weaken, and international negotiations may stall. Domestically, the shutdown deepens public cynicism. When citizens see their government locked in endless stalemate, trust erodes. That erosion weakens the very fabric of democratic legitimacy. Thus, the shutdown is not merely about a temporary lapse in funding, it is about America's ability to sustain its economic strength, strategic influence, and political credibility. Possible futures. Where does this go from here? 3 broad scenarios emerge. Scenario 1, de-escalation after 2 bruising weeks. Explanation: political leaders could finally feel the pressure. Polls may shift decisively against one side, creating an incentive to compromise. A short-term continuing resolution might be passed, extending funding for a few weeks or months while negotiations continue. This would reopen the government, paychecks, and calm markets, though without resolving the underlying disputes. It is the most likely scenario if public anger intensifies. Scenario 2, limited conflict. In this outcome, the shutdown continues but with partial relief. Congress might pass targeted funding bills for certain agencies, such as defense, Veterans Affairs, or air traffic control, while leaving others shuttered. This reduces some immediate pain but prolongs uncertainty. It creates winners and losers among federal workers, and it does not eliminate the political standoff. Both parties continue posturing, each waiting for the other to blink. Scenario 3, escalation. The darkest path is an extended shutdown stretching into weeks or even months. Here, economic damage accumulates. Credit rating agencies issue warnings, federal workers stage protests, public services deteriorate, markets turn volatile. Internationally, rivals seize on the paralysis to advance their own agendas. In this scenario, the shutdown becomes a true crisis of governance, raising questions about America's stability and resilience. These futures are not predetermined. They hinge on political calculations, public opinion, explanation, and the willingness or unwillingness of leaders to compromise. Tension peak and big question. 2 weeks into the shutdown, The tension is acute. Workers unpaid, services halted, the Senate entrenched. This is no longer about a single policy fight, explanation. It is about whether the American system of governance can function under the weight of partisanship. The world is watching a superpower test its own capacity to manage disagreement without grinding itself into paralysis. And so the big question emerges, explanation, is this shutdown just another temporary storm in Washington? Or is it a warning sign of deeper dysfunction that could reshape America's role in the world? Sure, the United States government shutdown is now in its second week. Federal employees, citizens, markets, and allies wait for resolution. While lawmakers trade blame in the Senate, the costs grow daily, and the stakes are nothing less than America's credibility at home and abroad. For Nation, we will continue to track this story as it unfolds. For now, the standoff remains unresolved, the government remains closed, Nation, and the question of leadership hangs in the balance. Stay tuned with Global Current Lens, where we bring clarity to the noise and context to the chaos.